sheet turned red. I concluded I had spoiled my other clothes, but when I dipped up water in my hand, the water was not colored. I washed it, boiled it, and hung it out to freeze for 3 to 4 days, but it still had a reddish color. I never knew that freezing clothes was a thing, but I read that it's called a process of sublimation, where the water in the clothes turns into gas and it just floats away rather than having to wait for it to evaporate. The cold temperature is also said to kill bacteria and odor, which I did hear about, and apparently the UV rays reflecting off of the snow can brighten whites and reduce stains. So Miss Mary Jane knew what she was doing, but it didn't work. Mary was never a fan of trout in Zona's marriage. When she first heard of her daughter's death, she reportedly said, "The devil has killed her," most likely referring to trout. Zona had given birth to a child out of wedlock in 1895, so Mary was probably really protective and critical of Zona's decisions after that. I couldn't find any more information about this child that she had had. Trout had come to live in Livesey's Mill from Pocahontas County, West Virginia nearby, to start a new life. This is where he met and quickly fell for Zona. Mary was so sure that her daughter had not died of natural causes after her death that she prayed nonstop for answers. She even prayed that the truth would be revealed. She stated one night, around 4 weeks after the funeral, after praying around an hour, a bright light formed in front of her and took the form of her daughter, Zona. Zona didn't speak. She just turned and vanished. The next night, after Mary prayed, Zona appeared again. This time, she spoke with her mother. It's not documented what she said, but Mary said it made her feel more accustomed or comfortable with the idea of Zona's spirit visiting her. The third night was similar, but on the fourth, Zona told her mother how her life had ended. In Mary's words, Zona explained, "Trout came home that night, the night before she was found, from the shop and seemed angry. I told him supper was ready, and he began to chide the fourth night, to really burn the image into Mary's mind and drive home the fact that her neck had been broken, Zona twisted her head all the way back. A complete 180. How could Mary, this older woman people described as hardworking, honest, God-fearing, come up with something like this in the late 1800s? Mary took her suspicions to John Alfred Preston, a local lawyer. He heard her out and sympathized with her, but being a man of the law, he knew that something more concrete was needed in order to open an investigation. Trout's behavior was beginning to become local gossip, and many people in the area were starting to question what had really happened to Zona. When John heard that Dr. Knapp had not done a full examination of Zona, he knew that this was probable cause to exhume her body. When Trout learned of their plans and that he was required by law to attend this new autopsy, he became extremely upset. He even went as far as saying that he knew he would be arrested, but that nobody could prove that he did it. He should have been arrested just based on that. On February 22nd, a month after her death, Zona was exhumed and properly examined for 3 days. Finger-shaped bruises were found across her throat. Her neck had been broken and her windpipe crushed. The ligaments in her neck were torn. I was curious about the weather during this time because February would have been mid-winter in this area, and apparently it was warm up until February 22nd, the day she was exhumed, when a very strong nor'easter hit, lasting through February 24th, dumping about 10 inches of snow in West Virginia. It warmed up again right after that, and I imagine that this cold air hitting that warm air front probably caused some heavy fog in the mountains. Trout was immediately arrested and taken to Lewisburg Penitentiary to await trial. After further investigation into his past, it was found that he had once spent 2 years in jail stealing a horse. But the most interesting thing that was discovered was that Zona was his third wife. The first, Allie Esteline Gottlieb, whom he had one child with, divorced him due to his violent tendencies. She even reportedly found a razor under his pillow one night. I assume that was the last straw. His second wife, Lucy Ann Tritt, was not so lucky. According to the Raleigh Register newspaper, she accidentally died on purpose. I have no idea what that means. Apparently, Trout was installed soon as